Okay, so I just tried to live stream this and it did not work. My audio was going crazy. I don't know what was going on. So I've seen a lot of talk about people wanting to delete the IDF system, and it is it's not easy to do, but it's not difficult to do. Okay, like you just have to have the right tools. You've got to be able to take the engine out of the ski. You know, you've got to have all those things to do. But when it comes down to the parts, that's the main thing, because people wonder how expensive it's going to be. Okay, so me, I like to be able to get OEM stuff and be able to get it as cheap as possible. Obviously, in this route, you're going to have to go with everything IDF or OEM on it. But let's say you've got an IDF ski, and then you find you don't want to have to pay full price for a new drive shaft, right? Let's say you find somebody had a used drive shaft from a 2020 RXTX 300 and an output sleeve, a PTO sleeve for like 20 bucks, right? And you're like, great, I'm in the game, this is going to work. Well, that's not how it works, okay? So I'm going to show you guys here. Let's get me to be a little bit smaller. Shrink it way down here. Okay, so in 2021 is when the IDF was initially brought to market, and it was only on the GTX Limited 300. So we're going to go to that ski and see what they have on it. Now, an IDF ski, I'll go ahead and say this: the drive shaft is extremely short on an IDF ski. It has to be, because the gearbox sits outside, beyond the PTO cover, which pushes everything down. And if you guys ever look inside of one of those, you've got like your PTO bellow bearing, and then right beside that is hardly any gap whatsoever, and there's your floating ring for your carbon seal. So the drive shaft is considerably shorter on it. So if you're going to be deleting it, here's a couple of things you're going to need to pay attention to. So let's immediately go over to the crankshaft. Now you can see here we've got crankshaft model without IDF gearbox and crankshaft model with IDF gearbox. Okay, so this 494 crankshaft has been the same crankshaft part number that has been since the 1630 Ace motor was brought to market. It's the same crankshaft in the GTX 130 Pro all the way to the RXTX 300. Okay. But when they came out with the IDF model, they changed the crankshaft slightly. The balancing weights and everything on it, the gear, everything is exactly the same except for the threaded end that has the PTO output shaft, or I'm sorry, the input shaft goes onto. So it's a little bit longer. I think it's about a half-inch longer, more of threads on it. I would speculate that the reason that they did that is because the input shaft for the IDF skis, the torque for that is 254 foot-pounds, and they wanted to have more threads, make sure that it could handle that extra torque, and it would not have any chance of possibly backing off. So they did change the crankshaft then. Okay, so if we go over to 2022 skis, we're going to see this. So we're going to go to the, let's just say, RXTX 300. Now, the part number for the with IDF crankshaft, let's keep that in mind. Just a second ago we looked at it, was ending in 498. So if we come over here to a RXTX 300 from 2022, crankshaft ends in 498. So that means that in 2022, and you can go look at any of the engines in 2022 that are 1630, they all got the crankshaft ending in part number 498. So it makes sense, right? You've made this crankshaft change for an IDF ski. Why are we going to have two different crankshafts? They're expensive to make. Let's just make one crankshaft and make it work in any of the skis. Okay, so what do we have to change with that? Well, if we've got a longer threaded end on it, two things have got to change. The standard old style PTO sleeve now is going to have to be changed. It's going to actually have more of a threaded end in it, and I think that they ended up making it longer. I haven't seen one in person. I'm just trying to speculate. I think it's actually shorter. They made it shorter, moved the splines for the drive shaft further down into it, so it could accommodate the extra threads on the crankshaft. And now the drive shaft, when it goes into the PTO sleeve and you put the pump onto it, you would have a shorter drive shaft and a shorter PTO sleeve. That way it would be able to accommodate for that longer crankshaft. Okay, so if we go and we look back in 2021, we can see these part numbers change. Okay, so we'll go again, RXTX 300. We're just going to use that. The drive shaft for 2020 and 2021, engines that have the larger diameter drive shaft being GTX 130 Pro, and and then the 230 and then the 300. I believe the 170 still had a smaller, the 170s had a smaller diameter drive shaft, but the GTX 130 Pro, which is meant to be a rental ski, has the bigger drive shaft from the 230 and the 300. Okay, so enough of that. So we're going to go here. It's going to be part number 230A. Drive shaft ends in 098. So we got to remember that, 098. Now we're going to go to 2022. Look at the drive shaft again for the RXTX 300. It did end in 098. You got to remember that. I'm saying the numbers out because I'm going to forget them. And where is our propulsion? There we go. Now it ends in 214. So from 2098 to 214. Okay, so drive shaft changed, right? Now let's go back to 2021. RXTX 300. And our PTO. Now here's another interesting thing too. Okay, so let's look at this diagram here. Hopefully you guys can see that. My face over here is not blocking it. We've got the part number 16 is the sealing ring, and then the stop sleeve, 14, and then 15 is our output sleeve. Okay, so we've got 770 is what our output sleeve is for part number 15. Go back to 2022. I'll check that out. There's no more sealing ring. Now we've just got the output sleeve, which now ends in 773, and then the stop sleeve is the same part number on it. So there you go. You've got different output sleeve, different drive shaft, and from 2021 to 2022 for the non-IDF skis. And that is because in 2022, all of the skis got the crankshaft ending in 498 that came out of the 2021 GTX Limited 300 that had IDF. Okay, so I know these are a lot of numbers and it's kind of back and forth. We're kind of like Back to the Future. It's 1954 and whatever, right? But this is just to kind of show you guys, like, if you're wanting to delete the IDF on your ski, you're not going to be able to go back to years prior and get parts that might have been cheaper, that have been sitting on the shelf, and it was, new old stock that you need to get rid of, or picking up a used drive shaft. Everything that you're going to use is going to have to be from a 2022 and up. And the first time that I ever noticed anything like this was I was working on a 2022 ski, and I had a 2020 GTX 230 drive shaft just sitting on my shelf from a ski that I've worked on. The splines weren't any good on it, and I just kind of kept it around. And I looked, and I just kind of thought that the 22 drive shaft just looked shorter for whatever reason. It was like, something's kind of off here. And sure enough, I put the 2020 GTX 230 drive shaft next to the one from the 22 RXTX 300, and it was shorter. I think it was like an inch, maybe a half inch shorter. And I couldn't really put the two together. I'm looking around, looking at the engine, I'm measuring the pump tunnel distance, I'm checking everything out, and the engine's still sitting in the exact same spot. So I was just like, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I'd asked somebody about it, and they said something. They were like, "Oh, this is a long story. It was actually, someone at BRP, and they didn't really give me any details on it." So then I blew my motor on my 2020 RXTX 300, and I wanted to find a donor motor. So I found a donor motor out of a 2021 GTX 300 Limited IDF, and I pulled that motor apart. Picked it up for $500. The whole long block, it had taken on water. Pistons are ruined in it. It's going to get re-sleeved. I really just needed it for the crankcase. So get everything out of it, and then I pull the crank out of it, and I'm looking at it, and I realize that it looks different. And I take the crank out of my old blown up motor, and I put it next to it, and I could see that the threaded end was longer on the IDF ski than the non IDF crankshaft that came out of my 2020, and then I kind of put that together, and then I started thinking about the drive shaft link from that 2020 RXTX 300. So I started doing digging and cross-referencing part numbers and everything, and that's what I found here. It took me a while to kind of bounce back between the two, but sure enough, you guys have seen it for yourself. In 2021, they changed the crankshaft. That if it was an IDF ski, you got a different crank. And in 2022, they put the same crankshaft in all the motors. They changed the PTO sleeve, and they changed the drive shaft as well. So just for those of you that are wanting to do this, if you decide to do it on your own, Riva does now sell a kit for it. I'm not sure if they include all of the part numbers online of what it is. But just know, if you're going to do this yourself, you're just going to need PTO cover from any of the 1630 motors. The PTO cover will work. The PTO, for non-IDF ski, PTO cover. But then you'll have to have the PTO sleeve and the drive shaft from a 2022 and up ski. So if you've got a GTX 170 that has it on it, you're going to have to get the GTX 170 drive shaft, and the PTO sleeve. For that would be the same as any of the other 1630 motors, but the drive shaft would be different just because of the diameter. But if you got a GTX 300 Limited, then you're going to have to get the drive shaft and the PTO sleeve from a non-IDF 230 or 300 engine. So that's all I got for you guys. I didn't want to take up too much of the time. I tried to do this on the live stream, and again, I don't know what happened with the audio. Hopefully it worked well with this one. I'll check it before I post it, but that's all I got for you, and we'll see you around. If you guys have any questions, drop a comment, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Take care.